With that, welcome you inside this edition of Big Ten Today. I'm your host, Rick Pizzo. It is a discussion much bigger than sports. The interim CEO of the American Cancer Society with us during Suits and Sneakers Week, and Bruce Feldman on all the moving parts in Columbus following Ohio State's natty. We'll also touch on what's next season for Michigan, Oregon, and other contenders inside the Big Ten. But first, welcome in Trent Meacham to the show as well. Trent, I don't think you played 20 conference games back in your day, but for those that are playing 20 against league competition now, we're at the halfway point. There have been some surprises, and there have been some teams that are playing pretty much as we expected them to do before the year began.
No, I did not play 20 games, and this season it just feels longer because of more teams, more travel. I think it's fantastic, and here's the only thing I'd say is don't assume where the standings are now, that's what they'll be in another 5 or 6 weeks. There's so many more games to happen. And last night we had a couple games go down to the last second, last possession. That's on a nightly basis. So this is one of the best, I think, Big Ten basketball seasons we've ever had. It's fun to be a part of.
Yeah, Monday night did tip off the final 6 weeks of the regular season. So we're halfway home. And our big story looks back on Monday night and looks back at a fantastic finish in Ann Arbor. Penn State put itself in position to win for the first time in the league on the road, and then Trey Donaldson said not so much. Donaldson nails late, including an awesome step-back three-pointer to seal this one as the Wolverines remain perfect at home. Man, that locker room inside the Chrysler Center has been a lot of fun this season.
Now's the time of year when teams are going one direction or the other. Yep. They're slowing down, going down, or they're going up. And remember, our success isn't going to look like this perfect. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be dings, but at some point, fellas, we're going to take off. We're going to take off, and we'll find our rhythm, our flow. Just stay with the process, fellas. The power around the rim, the rebounding, the communication on defense. I thought our communication was much better today than it's been. That's a testament to you guys taking over practice, what we've been working on. Guys, let's focus on getting better. If you had a bad game, who cares, right? Your teammates picked you up. That's a beautiful thing about being on a team sport. Good win, fellas. Good win. 1, 2, we know what to do. Hail to the victor, hail to the conquering heroes, hail to Michigan, the leaders. Let's go, Blue. Hail to the victor.
Trent, I'll get to the game and Trey Donaldson in a second, but how about Dusty May? I mean, here's a guy in his first year. He's just such a smooth fit in Ann Arbor. What a great hire. He's pushing all the right buttons.
Smooth is a great way of describing him, Rick. First that starts with his coaching staff that he brought in, and then recruiting his team. And you think about he brought in a couple of big men that nobody thought would maybe work too well together. At least a lot of people didn't. He's made that work. And this is a complete team. Rick, I've said this before. I think they're still looking for a complete game, but they have a complete roster. They're still building. They're still growing as a team. They're in a great position now. And I thought last night, and give him a lot of credit, the two things where they've struggled, the biggest areas, turnovers, they had less than 10, and closing out games, and they got it done there at the end of the game. So give Dusty May a ton of credit for this season, but then how they finished last night.
I think it's a huge get for them last night to be able to win that game with Vlad Golden, clearly not himself, battling some type of illness, played just 17 minutes, was ineffective. Danny Wolf was better than he had been the last couple of games, but certainly didn't fill up the stat sheet. To me, if those two guys have average or below average games and you can still beat a really good Penn State team thanks to your backcourt, that makes Michigan really dangerous moving forward.
There's no doubt. And because those guys have been two of the best in the country when you think of the 4 and 5 position. And so last night it wasn't there, especially for Golden, who's been so consistent, so reliable for them, especially in conference play. And just a huge shout out to Trey Donaldson. How he finished that game was remarkable. And you think about his subpar performance on the road at Purdue, 1 assist, 6 turnovers. Last night to have 21, 7 assists, 0 turnovers, 4 steals. And at the end of the game, and I'm going to go back to Dusty May, in less than 2 minutes left, they're down 5 with the ball. They have a possession going nowhere, and he calls a timeout. Then they execute, leads to a Roddy Gale dunk. Trey Donaldson, Rick, he accounted for the last 11 points of the game for Michigan, 9 points for himself, plus that assist to Roddy Gale. He made all of the crucial plays. It was mid-range jumpers. It was getting to the basket. It was that step-back three to win the game. the closing minutes for Donaldson was as good as I've seen from any player this year in the Big Ten Conference. Just a huge performance and a big win for them against a Penn State team that's despite their recent record, they're playing really good basketball.
Yeah, Penn State needs to find a way to close those close games, their last 4 losses, by a total of 11 points. One thing that wasn't close, the Iowa-Ohio State game on Monday night. Buckeyes just jumped out to a first-half lead and really never looked back. Ohio State right now, just really well-rounded. It's not all about Bruce Thornton or Devin Royal. You're getting contributions from Micah Parrish, Sean Stewart, so many other guys as Jake Diebler and company pick up a win at home that, to be honest, they had to have. And it also kind of backed up that road win at Purdue. I know Iowa may be in a little bit of a bad place right now. We'll get to the Hawkeyes in a second. But, Trent, I mentioned all these different pieces that Ohio State seems to be putting into place. Evan Mahaffey also does a lot of different roles for this team as well. I really like what I've seen from Ohio State the last couple of games.
You nailed it, Rick. It's the balance offensively for them. They've relied so much on Bruce Thornton, and he's going to bring it every night. He produces, he defends at a high level, but they need other guys giving him consistent help. Now you have Micah Parrish averaging 20 a game over the last 3. John Mobley, big-time shooter. He's got 8 assists. I mean, so for different players to step up, the front court is not filled with scores. But if Devin Royal can be consistent in double figures, if Mahaffey, if Stewart, if Bradshaw, if these guys can give them something, running the court, playing with energy, finishing around the basket, that's so important for them. Defensively, they've been better. I thought they were good for 40 minutes last night. Now, and then they found their rhythm offensively with 52 points in the second half. So this team seems to be finding its footing. They were a bit up and down. And as you said, Rick, to back up the massive win on the road against Purdue, they've lost the last few at home. It's a nice win for them. They got to keep it going. They got to keep building on their resume, but they're playing good basketball. It helps when you have a point guard like Bruce Thornton, but of course, those others stepping up is so crucial for them. It's
a season low in points for Iowa, so let's credit Ohio State's defense, but you also start to wonder a little bit about the Hawkeyes. Owen Freeman was his effective self down low, but when Iowa has games like that from Josh Dix last night, who basically didn't show up on the stat sheet, and Peyton Sanford, who really struggled shooting the ball, this just probably isn't a team that's good enough defensively to overcome those kind of struggles on the offensive end.
No question. They're smaller. They got out-rebounded by 12. That's almost what they're getting out-rebounded by night in and night out in the Big Ten play. And if that's the case, they're going to have to shoot the ball well. Last night, 7 for 25 from 3, 10 for 17 from the free throw line. They just have little margin for error because of their limits on defense and rebounding. And if they're not shooting the ball great, it's going to be hard for them to win games. You mentioned Josh Dix. I also say Brock Harding's a guy. If he's giving them something offensively, if he's able to break down the defense and get other guys open shots, last night 0 points, only 2 assists, they need more from him as well. So this team, it felt like it was defensively where they really needed to get picked up. And now, Rick, it's both sides of the ball. And so that's concerning. We'll see if they can get something going. I like Traore. When they play Seydou Traore, he gives them some physicality, some athleticism. He's been scoring the ball a little bit. Thelwell's been consistent. So maybe if they give Traore some more minutes, give them something different. I also will say I like when they pick up full court. And it's hard to do if you're not scoring the ball. But just to get them going defensively in that mindset, I think is really important for this Iowa ball club.
Hawkeyes also have to figure out how to win on the road, something that UCLA did on Monday night. Now, to be fair, it was a very short road, not a huge road trip to go from L.A. to L.A. and from campus to campus. But what a big win for the Bruins over USC. This is an absolutely phenomenal basketball game. So much fun to watch. Kobe Johnson gave the early shush, and then UCLA found a way late. USC really hung around for a long time. 4th straight win for the Bruins in this series. Mick Cronin and company relying a lot on that guy, Adai Mara, and a balanced attack to keep winning inside the Big Ten.
The Big Ten Conference, you got Minnesota playing the way they're playing. Penn State up 5 with a minute to play at Michigan. And it's any win is a great win. Period. End of story in this league. And we just won 2 in a row on the road without our leading scorer. Not many teams in the country are going to win on the road in a rivalry game against a great coach, okay, a heck of a team of older guys without their leading scorer. So you got definitely, if I'm happy, understatement.
Trust me, Mick Cronin was happy. He may have not looked happy, but he was very happy. And this team is trending in the right direction, Trent. And the biggest reason why, the biggest guy on the court, Adai Mara, at one point a couple of weeks ago, they were more worried about simply limiting his minutes. Last night, he was so effective. He looked over to Mick. He was raising his hand, asking for a timeout, needed a breather. Cronin said, "No way, you're staying on the court. We need you."
Hey, the big guy, 7'3", sophomore from Spain. He's playing at such a high level. Last night, 12 points, 11 rebounds, he had 5 blocks. His averages over the last 3, 15 points, almost 8 rebounds, 4 blocks a game. He gives them something different. You think about Bilodeau, who is probably their best player. Him going out now has allowed Mara to step in and just give them something different. You got to account for him offensively because he's so tall, so long. He's a lob threat. You got to box him out on the glass. Defensively, he uses his length. He uses his size incredibly well. He didn't show it too much last night, but he can really pass the ball well. His upside is so high, one of the more talented players in the Big Ten. So it's been great to see him getting some action and really producing at a high level here in the last few games. And that bodes so well for UCLA moving forward. Especially you think you get Bilodeau back and they can give you some different looks. Eric Daly on the inside, I thought he was great. He set the tone last night, got a steal and dunk that opening possession. I just like how they're playing, Rick. They lost 4 straight, and Cronin's just killing them in press conferences. Well, you know what? Now they've won 4 straight. They're playing well. Sebastian Mack seems to be the guy in the clutch that they're going to. He's done this multiple games now recently against Wisconsin, getting to the free throw line. Last night, that big 3. They're going to him in the clutch. They have a lot of guards that they're interchanging. So they're playing with great purpose right now. And, of course, you have that guy Mara, the big fella stepping up. That's big for them as well.
Yeah, and they did a great job last night on Desmond Claude, not letting one of the Big Ten's top scorers get into the lane and drive to the hole. You want to play for Mick Cronin? You're going to play some defense. UCLA picks up a big win against a crosstown rival inside the Galen Center. Break up the Gophers. Left for dead after an 0-6 start in league play, Minnesota has ripped off 3 straight victories, 2 over ranked opponents, including the most recent dub over then number 15 Oregon. Dawson Garcia had 31, getting all sorts of help tonight. The Gophers on the road to take on the Big Ten's lone unbeaten in Michigan State, a team that has done a little bit of everything, both at home, on the road, in the non-conference as well. For more on that matchup, welcome Trent Meacham back in. Trent, let's start with Michigan State. When you start to look around at what Tom Izzo has and all the different pieces, it reminds you so much of some of his teams that didn't necessarily have stars, but ended up making a run to the Final Four. This team feels a lot like that team that did it shockingly through Syracuse in the regionals and into the Final Four. I believe it was back in 2015.
Yeah, they have a lot of guys, and they can hit you at different points. Those bigs are all playing better. Fiddler and Carr off the bench have played better, raised their game in recent weeks. Jay Akins, he's been pretty darn consistent. He might not be the star, but man, he's been really good all season. The guy that I would single out though is Jeremy Fears Jr. In conference play, 8.5 points a game, 7 assists, 2 turnovers, and he's only playing about 24 minutes a game. So how efficient, how productive he is in those minutes. He pushes the ball as well as any Spartan point guard that I can remember. And you got those wings flying. You got guys like Jace Richardson coming off the bench. So it's hard to name one guy or think of what's that one thing, that they're doing. Obviously, they're rebounding, they're running the court. But I love how Jeremy Fears Jr. is playing. In a league where the point guards are as good as they've been in a while, I think this is a point guard dominant league, which is different than it's been. Jeremy Fears has been fantastic. He defends. He's kind of ahead of the snake right now for Michigan State. But as you said, Rick, there's so many guys that can hurt you, and it just makes it you don't know. You're game planning for them, and you don't know who it is. So they're playing so well. They're fun to watch, and they do it on both sides of the floor.
Yeah, I would throw Cohen Carr into that mix as well. We knew him last year as just a dunker, and he's certainly a high flyer, but the job he did defensively on Ace Bailey in that game inside Madison Square Garden, he can lock down guys with his combination of size and athleticism. Didn't even mention Trey Holloman either. I think the biggest issue for Tom Izzo right now, finding who is your best five and what the best rotation is when you get into a Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament situation. As for Minnesota, this was completely unseen. You look at their current 3-game win streak, courtesy of our big stat, and you see phenomenal numbers in terms of the assist to turnover ratio. You're averaging nearly 19 per game over the last 3 and just 9 turnovers, so about 2.2 to 1. You look at the previous 4 games when Minnesota went 0-4, it's basically 1 to 1, which is not going to get it done when you're a Gopher team that is somewhat limited in your offensive options. Yes, you have Mitchell, you have Garcia. Odekale's been much better as of late, but that's been pretty much the scoring for Minnesota. Trent, Parker Fox is a nice piece, but not necessarily an offensive weapon. I just think you have to give Ben Johnson and this staff a ton of credit. After the way they lost that Ohio State game in double overtime, everything that went down starting 0-6, it could have gone sideways. It's gone the exact opposite direction. It's headed straight up.
Yeah, I was talking to my former coach, Bruce Weber. He had their game in Maryland after that Ohio State game, and he thought the morale was really hurting at that point. And something flipped. Give Ben Johnson a ton of credit because the belief is there, the confidence is there, and that is so hard to do when you're going through these losing stretches. You can't seem to find a win. You had a disappointing loss to Ohio State, so the belief is there. It helps when you have a guy like Dawson Garcia and you feel like here's the best player on the court any given night to play through him. He's coming off a 31-point game, but it's so many different guys that have contributed. Maybe it's Odekale one game. He had 18 against Iowa. You mentioned Parker Fox, 13-11 against Oregon. Mitchell's had some big moments. He had 10 assists against Oregon. Lakai Patterson at the point has been playing much better. He had some big clutch shots against Michigan. So they've needed different guys to step up, not just Dawson Garcia, but the belief is the biggest thing for them. And then I think defensively and schematically on offense, just controlling the pace of the game. They've done a really good job, whether that's against Michigan that wants to get up and down, or Iowa that wants to get up and down, or a more balanced Oregon team. They've controlled the pace, and of course, that'll be crucial against Michigan State.
So what does make the difference tonight in East Lansing, Trent?
Well, if you're Minnesota, you got to play through your All-American caliber player in Dawson Garcia. And he's rare this year in the Big Ten. And when you think about his size at 6'10", 6'11", he's about 240 pounds. And he can operate from so many different parts of the court. They love to get him in the high post for isolations, but he can post as well. He can take you out to the perimeter. He's knocking down threes. He can take you off the bounce. So Michigan State is going to have their hands full with him. You'd expect them to kind of form a wall, try to make someone else to beat you. And also for Minnesota, the guard's going to have to be great to handle the pressure, control the pace of the game. That'll be really important for them to steal one on the road. But they're playing with house money now going to Michigan State. And for the Spartan side, they just got to keep doing what they're doing. They got to keep rebounding like they have, because that allows them to get out, run in transition, get multiple guys going, and then they're just in constant attack mode to the basket. They've been doing that night in, night out. And so far, nobody's really been able to stop them.
Minnesota's been great, of course. 2 of those 3 wins during this win streak have come at home. Now you have to try and win at one of the toughest places, not just in the Big Ten, one of the toughest places in the country at the Breslin Center.
OH! The best damn team in the land resides right here in Columbus.
Really embodied what it's like to be from Ohio. You get punched in the mouth, you always get back up and keep fighting.
The national championship trophy is back where it belongs in the great state of Ohio. Now let's go get another one of these. Go Bucks! Go Bucks!
With Ohio State's official national championship celebration now in the rear view, and we're about a week past the national championship winning game against Notre Dame. Welcome in, Bruce Feldman. Try to put this all into perspective. Bruce, when we look back on this, say, in a decade, 15 years, what's the lead paragraph? What's the overarching narrative regarding Ohio State's championship season?
I think it's the best team overcame maybe its own challenges and showed that you can keep getting better as the year goes on, and it's hard to write off talent. And I thought credit to Ryan Day and his staff, and certainly the players, because being in Columbus when they lost to their hated arch rival, and it was a shocker of a game because it wasn't a great Michigan team this year. And so many people, said this team and this coach this year is not going to be their year. And they proved everybody wrong. And I thought it was a great, I talked to Ryan Day's wife right after the game, Nina, and we talked a lot about what their family had been through. And obviously the players had been through a lot, and how these people all rallied together, had each other's back, and fought and got back up. And I think there's a lot of great lessons in that.
And when you win the Natty, you celebrate for about a day and a half in Columbus because folks are already thinking about what's next. Ryan Day even said it. Now let's go get another one. You're going to have a brand new backfield, quarterback, 2 running backs. Emeka Buka also gone. Defensively, you lose, 9 guys probably who are going to play in the NFL in a year or 2. You also lose the DC. So it's not an easy question, Bruce, but what is next for this team?
So you should try to do it again in a different way, because I would argue they will have the 2 best players in the best offensive player and the best defensive player in college football. And honestly, the best overall player in Jeremiah Smith. I mean, you have an incredible receiver. You have an incredible defensive back and Caleb Downs, who's a leader. You have 2 guys who are complete tone setters in terms of their prep. I mean, they're phenomenal athletes, but in terms of their mental preparation and their competitiveness, I think those are great building blocks. Having been around Ohio State a lot, not just this past year, but the year before that, there's a lot of really good players that are still there. I've seen a lot of Julian Sayin, who's the young quarterback who had started out at Alabama, transferred there. I think he can be pretty special. You look at what they already did in the portal, knowing some guys on the staff. We're talking about they added 2 big-time offensive tackles. One of them came from Rice, was a guy a lot of staffs thought was the number 1 offensive lineman in the portal, 6'5", 345, and can move. You add a tight end from Purdue, who a lot of people think kind of reminds them of, as a Zach Ertz type. And again, they have recruited exceptionally well. I would be more surprised if they're not in the playoff next year than, no matter what they had to replace. I'd be shocked if they weren't, because I think they're that good. And also, I think the key guys are the kinds of building blocks and leaders that they have a hunger and an edge. And again, I like what they did in the portal, in terms of the pieces they added. I think they're well positioned to be a top 5 team again. I think people are crazy if you think they're going to fall off.
They will have to replace at least one, if not multiple, staff members. Wait and see if Chip Kelly is going to answer any of that NFL interest that's coming. But Jim Knowles already decided he's headed to Penn State. 3.1 million reasons why. He's also a Philadelphia native, so probably not all about money. But how much does that affect not just Ohio State's expectations for next year? How does it also impact Penn State?
It's an interesting situation because on one hand, you look at Penn State and you're like, the reason why they haven't been close to winning a national title has not been the defense. Whether it was Brent Pry, they were good on defense. Manny Diaz, they were outstanding on defense. And Tom Allen, they were really good. Now, like Ohio State a year ago, a lot of their key guys, not Abdul Carter, but almost everybody else is back. I mean, Denai Dennis Sutton was a menace on the field in the playoff. You look at Zane Durant, you look at the 2 running backs, obviously Drew Aller, they do have to replace, an elite tight end, Tyler Warren. But one thing I think that's key with this, if you're James Franklin, is you think you just made your biggest rival a little weaker because now Ohio State has to replace a terrific defensive mind. Obviously, Jim Knowles did a really, really outstanding job, especially, where they came from the middle of the season. I mean, they're the number 1 defense in the country. I think that certainly helps at Penn State. Maybe this is something that helps get them over the edge, but it certainly, if at least in the short term, feels like it weakens the national TAMs.
Let's go to Eugene, reigning Big Ten champs, Oregon. Dan Lanning used the portal at quarterback masterfully the last couple of years. Had Bo Nix, then had Dylan Gabriel, both outstanding guys. Now it appears they'll go in-house this time. Former UCLA Bruin Dante Moore kind of waiting his time. What's the future look like for the Ducks?
It's going to be interesting because, as you said, they had guys with a lot of experience who played a ton of football, who took over and fit seamlessly in what they want. Dante Moore was a 5-star recruit, obviously, for a Michigan kid who went out to UCLA, struggled when he did play. Now, people really like his arm talent in terms of just his touch, his accuracy. They, talking to people on the Duck staff in the last couple of weeks, they are really excited about him, but he does not have anywhere near the experience those other two guys had. And those other two guys played a ton of big games. I remember Dylan Gabriel when he was a quarterback at Oklahoma, willing them against Texas where he ran for like 120 yards. Bo Nix played every big SEC environment, whereas you have Dante Moore. If he ends up running the show, which we expect, he's a guy who did play against Utah, and that's a tough environment, and obviously they have a really good defense, but it was there's just way less reps. But I know that they really are high on him, and they have really good talent around him. And I think that, clearly Dan Lanning and his staff have a real good feel for what they need to add and how it fits. And I know they really targeted Dante Moore, and they loved what they've seen. I haven't talked to Will Stein, the offensive coordinator there, a bunch this offseason. He's very excited about Dante Moore.
And we'll see how they're motivated by a really ugly loss in that Rose Bowl to Ohio State. Now, on the flip side, what a great finish it was for Michigan after what was really a disappointing year. You beat Ohio State to finish the regular season. You beat Alabama in a bowl game with basically half your roster on the field. But they also have quarterback questions. And I think the one question everybody asking is Bryce Underwood coming in, is he simply a plug-and-play guy from day one for Sharon Moore in the maize and blue?
Yeah, I talked to some of the coaches who were around, watched him and during the bowl practices, and they were really, really impressed. I don't want to say that they're like, okay, he's going to be the guy from day one, but they were really impressed. It sounds like he is as advertised in terms of the physical talent and everything they're looking for. Mikey Keene comes in from Fresno State. He has played a lot and played well. I think he is somebody who will be, I don't want to say impossible to beat out, but he's somebody who will certainly push Underwood. I think you obviously got to remember you have a new offensive staff. Chip Lindsey comes in, new offensive coordinator at least. You lose some really good players on the defense. They had three, dominant defensive linemen, two guys in the middle, obviously with Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and Josiah Stewart was an excellent edge rusher. But I really liked how they kept getting better as the year went on. We saw them early against Texas, and Texas shredded them. That was Wink Martindale's really his second college game. By the end of the year, not just against a really good Ohio State team, but that Alabama team, unlike Michigan had a bunch of guys opt out. Most of the best players on Alabama were there, and they, Michigan just took it to them. It was impressive. I feel like Sharon Moore at the end of the year, they really have a lot of momentum, not just with those two big wins, certainly a huge win getting Bryce Underwood, beating LSU to get him to stay home. I think those are kinds of things that they're going to build off of. I would not be surprised they added some other key pieces in the spring through the portal because they were so one-dimensional on offense. I mean, this is a good time to be a Michigan fan, even though your arch rival just won the national title. You can say you beat them. You say you just beat Alabama again, and you got a lot of really bright future, it seems like.
All right, Bruce, I quickly want to touch on one team that intrigues you heading into next year, and it's Nebraska. They got back to a bowl, but it wasn't exactly the finish that Nebraska wanted after a really good start. What are the intriguing storylines in Lincoln for Matt Rule as he heads into another year with the Huskers?
You got to replace a really good defense coordinator in Tony White. You got to replace some high-level D linemen. But I think Raiola finished well. I like some of the guys. Andrew Marshall is one of the best players in the portal. He is a cornerback from Idaho. When you watch, they almost beat Oregon in the opener. They gave them all they could handle. He was really good, big-time player. And I feel like Matt Rule is building it. The two programs that I think we are not talking enough about in the Big Ten are Nebraska and Illinois, with what Bielema not only did to finish the year, but you got Luke Altmaier back. You've got some other, they are building, and I think did not get enough credit for what they did this year. Well said. Good stuff, as always, from our friend Bruce Feldman of Fox Sports. Bruce, appreciate the time and the insight. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Rick. Coming up Wednesday, a huge night of hoops begins at 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific with a brand new edition of The Journey. Then the tip-off show gets you ready for a Big Ten doubleheader as 17th-ranked Wisconsin takes on Maryland, followed by Rutgers at Northwestern. You can only see it all right here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app.
It is time for today's big interview. In fact, the conversation much bigger than just sports alone, as we welcome in the interim CEO of the American Cancer Society, Dr. Wayne Frederick. Dr. Frederick, first and foremost, thanks for being with us. I know you're a very busy man, but this is obviously a very important topic for us to discuss. And our viewers may be seeing their favorite coaches on the basketball sidelines this week. It's the more visible aspect of suits and sneakers. What does this particular initiative mean to the American Cancer Society?
Thanks for having me. This initiative means a lot to the American Cancer Society, the National Association of Basketball Coaches, and the Coaches versus Cancer have really partnered well with the American Cancer Society for many years, since 1993, raising awareness about the risk of cancer and about the fact that people need to be screened. The earlier you're diagnosed, the more likely you will survive. So this is a very important initiative for us.
Dr. Frederick, you were personally part of a university setting during your time as president of your alma mater, Howard University. Why are college coaches and the fans who support their team such a good match for your mission?
You know, it's great. When I was at Howard as a student, I'll start there. I was the manager of the soccer team that went to the NCAA Final Four in 1988, lost to Indiana in the final game. And one of the things I noticed about college sports back then, that was a very early experience, my freshman year, was how much people rally around sports on college campuses. And therefore, it's a focal point for that exercise. The second thing is I think athletes and coaches tend to be exemplars on campuses. And so getting the fans to really see them taking up an issue such as this really gets everybody involved. And lastly, I would say college sports, especially basketball, brings so many different generations together. And it's important. It's important for our young people on campus to start early in terms of their lifestyle and how they go about their day-to-day, and for them to be encouraging their older family members and friends to get screened. And so I think it's a great opportunity for the fans and coaches and players to come together.
I'm glad you just used the word generations, because this partnership is truly a generational partnership at this point. Why do you think it's been so successful for such a long period of time?
I think it's been successful because the coaches have been consistent, that consistency of their messaging as well as their behavior. Some of them have been affected by the disease and have been open about it and have come out and spoken about it and spoken about their journey. And I think that has been important. I think the other thing that's critical, especially when you think of the generational issue, is we now have younger people being diagnosed with cancer, unfortunately, and that has affected a lot of mainstream things for young people. You look at somebody like my Howard alum, Chadwick Boseman, the Black Panther, who passed away with metastatic colorectal cancer at the age of 40. I mean, there's no screening program we have right now that catches that, but we do want people to be aware if they have unusual symptoms, abdominal pain, blood in their stool, to be thinking about cancer, even in a younger age group in their 30s, and unfortunately, even as young as 20. So it is a generational issue now, without a doubt.
You've mentioned screening now a couple of times already, and last year I was introduced to the term set the screen, which means much more than it just means in the term of the basketball sense. For the American Cancer Society, what is Set the Screen and that initiative all about?
Yeah, it's critical. It's us trying to get people to follow those screening guidelines, get out and to get screened. We have clear guidelines for things like prostate cancer, for breast cancer, where people can go get mammograms. For prostate cancer, you can get a PSA and a digital rectal exam, have a doctor, feel that prostate and make sure that it's in good condition. But then we have other areas. Lung cancer is still the leading cause of death. And I would say only probably 1 in 5 people who should be getting screened are getting screened. So that Set the Screen is really trying to get people to think about screening and to make sure that they're getting involved with their medical practitioner to ensure that they're staying on schedule to get all of their screenings done.
Dr. Frederick, where is the American Cancer Society today in comparison to, let's say, a decade ago in the quest for its ultimate goal, and what recent advances should we be aware of?
Our ultimate goal is to end cancer for everyone as we know it. And back in 1991, we had reached a peak in terms of the rate of cancer deaths. I'm happy to say today that rate of cancer deaths continues to ebb since 1991. Since 1991, because of a variety of advancements, we've probably saved about 4.5 million lives, or less than, above 4.5 million lives less have been lost as a result of cancer because of screening, advances in diagnostic techniques, advances in treatment. And so we clearly are making progress. And we recently put out our cancer facts and figures last week, and I think that was widely received in terms of the progress we're making. Having said that, there are areas of concern. We still are not making as much progress with cancers like pancreatic cancer. We have more women now getting their incidence of cancer has increased. Younger women forming a significant part of the overall incidence of cancer. And in lung cancer in particular, we now are up to about 20% of those cancers in non-smokers. And that's a concern. And women under the age of 64 in particular suffering from those diseases. So we certainly have made progress, but there's a lot more for us to do. And we know that if we close the gap on screening, if everyone who should be screened gets screened and gets a diagnosis earlier, in the few people that we will find a diagnosis, their outcomes could be even better.
You mentioned the recent increase in younger people getting cancer, which is a little bit of a change. But one thing that really hasn't changed, and one thing that perhaps Dr. Frederick has not addressed as much, is that while cancer affects us all, it does not affect races and ethnicities the same. What should we know about how cancer affects different races and different ethnicities?
Yeah, unfortunately, Native Americans, Hispanic Americans, and African Americans are far more likely to die from cancers, even in cancers where they are less likely to get it. So, for instance, Black women getting breast cancer, far less likely to get it than white women, but once they do get it, they're far more likely to die. And so we still have a significant disparity in outcomes. Black Americans are probably 2 to 2.5 times more likely to die from the cancers that they get. Hispanic Americans and Native Americans more likely to die, probably 3 times more so. And so some of that has to do with access, without a doubt, but some of it has to do with late diagnoses. And therefore, we have a screening gap there as well, in which we want people, especially of those ethnicities, to be getting on a track to get those screenings done in a timely fashion so that they can have their diagnoses a lot earlier. Nobody wants to be diagnosed with cancer, don't get me wrong. But if you have a choice, you certainly want that diagnosis to be made early so that you can get an early intervention and a far more likely outcome that's favorable.
Dr. Frederick, I'd like to finish with your final word and anything else you'd like to share with our viewers who may be watching, those who have been or perhaps have not yet in their lives been affected by cancer, and what they should be thinking of on a daily basis.
You know, especially with Coaches versus Cancer, one is I want everybody to get involved. Coaches versus Cancer has been an amazing opportunity for the American Cancer Society. They've raised about $10 million annually, I think well over $180 million since the inception of the program. And so I want people to be thinking about healthy lifestyle, what you're eating, watch what you're eating, get a balanced diet, consult with your physician, see your primary care physician every year, follow those directions, take your meds, make sure you get your screenings, don't smoke. Limit and moderate your alcohol intake, especially if you have a family history of a cancer. And most importantly, look out for one another. We want people to be communicating about these things. For too long, things like cancer have lived in the shadows of our conversations, especially around family histories and so on. And we want people at the dinner table to bring these things up, to encourage their peers, their elders, and younger people to be considering getting screened so that they can get a diagnosis early.
Wonderful information and advice from Dr. Wayne Frederick, Interim CEO of the American Cancer Society. Dr. Frederick, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything that you and your organization do for our country and our world.
And thank you.
Coming up tonight, don't miss Big Ten women's hoops when the Hawkeyes host the Wildcats. Our coverage begins at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Here's a look at the up-to-the-minute Big Ten men's basketball standings. Michigan State, of course, at the top as the league's only unbeaten. Purdue and Michigan with 2 losses each. Wisconsin right now would be the 4th and final team to get that double bye if the Big Ten tournament bracket were filled out this afternoon, which fortunately for everybody else in the league, it is not. Trent Meacham will be monitoring those standings each and every day until the final day of the regular season. But before we get there, Trent, let's look back to the first half of the Big Ten Conference season and some of your more pleasant surprises in terms of players. Nick Martinelli's ascendance to become really option A now for Northwestern when Brooks Barnheiser's been kind of banged up has been a really nice add for Chris Collins and the Wildcats.
Yeah, he had some nice moments last year, and I think probably Coach Collins thought he would take a step this year. But to lead the Big Ten in scoring, him and Ace Bailey tied at 19.8 points per game. He's had some monster games. Had 27 against Michigan State and Illinois. Had 32 earlier this season against Dayton. He got the year started off with a bang. We see that last-second game winner too. So he has performed at such a high level, and he does it. A lot of it is just one-on-one, getting a bucket. If he's not getting set up by his teammates, he goes and gets it himself. He's shooting the 3-ball better. He's great from that high post. He understands angles. And those lefties, man, Rick, they just have a way of finishing around the basket. He's been terrific this year.
What about Kasparas Yakachonis? I know he's slowed down a little bit lately. He's had some off games, been banged up a little bit. But what an add the young fella has been to Brad Underwood's team.
What's been surprising is he came in with a pretty big name, but I cannot remember the last European point guard to come to the NCAA and play at a high level, as high of a level as he. There's been some big guys here and there. Michigan's had couple good German players. They had Iggy from Lithuania. But Kasparas Yakachonis as a point guard leading a top 20 team, he does it in so many different ways. And he's been pretty consistent. He's had a couple games recently that maybe weren't his best games. He had some turnover issues against Maryland, but probably the most consistent freshman in what's been a loaded class. And that's very rare, especially for a European coming playing a different style of ball. He's been terrific as well.
Another guy who had a really good season last year but has now taken it to another level, especially as of late, Wisconsin's John Blackwell.
And what's been surprising to me is he's done it from the point guard position, averaging over 16 points a game, and he's leading an offense that's top 10 in the country. So you think about they lost Chucky Hepburn, who'd been their PG for 3 seasons. Now you don't know where they're going to turn, and to hand the ball to John Blackwell, he's such a physical guard getting to the basket. He's running that offense. He's getting himself, into the paint, scoring, into the free throw line. Been a big year so far for Blackwell.
Speaking of big, that's where we go next. And at Purdue, the question was, how would the Boilermakers replace Zach Edey? Everybody thought it would be Daniel Jacobson. Then he's gone before the year even starts. In steps Trey Kaufman ran to a slightly different, bigger role, and TKR has been fantastic.
Well, he ain't Zach Edey. He's about 6 or 7 inches shorter, but he's been really good. He's been in double figures, I believe, every game, averaging over 18 a game, over 6 rebounds a game. He can be a playmaker in those short roll situations, 2.5 assists a game. So been one of the most consistent players in the Big Ten, and he's a guy they can play through for Purdue. He's a security blanket for Braden Smith in the low post, in the short roll for himself, for his teammates, having such a good year. We expected an increase in production, but I didn't expect what he's doing now. He's playing like a first-team all-conference player.
No question about it. The question now becomes, will he and Braden Smith potentially share votes toward the end of the year when it comes to all Big Ten, not just first team, but are they both in the conversation for Player of the Year? Another talk that I'm sure you and I will be having over the next 6 weeks. Great stuff, as always, from Trent Meacham. Our thanks to guest Dr. Wayne Frederick of the American Cancer Society as well, and Bruce Feldman, as we wrap up this edition of Big Ten Today.